In early March 2026, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. 1/5 of the world's oil normally moves through that channel. Within days, the International Energy Agency called it the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. You felt it at the pump. Gas in America climbed past $4.50 a gallon. In Europe, gas benchmarks nearly doubled. The World Bank cut its growth forecast for the year to the lowest level since the pandemic. But something else spiked in the hours after the first bombs fell. Researchers watching social media logged a sharp surge in posts calling for a Muslim Exclusion Act. Calls to deport every Muslim in America, not from anonymous accounts in the dark corners of the internet, from verified users, from commentators, and eventually from members of Congress. The shooting stopped. The prices did not come down, and neither did the hate. If you want the full picture of how economic collapse rewrites who a country decides to blame, subscribe now. We break down one of these stories every week, and this one is going to define the next 12 months. Now let's get into it. Here is the uncomfortable thing about scapegoating. It is not irrational. It works. When an economy breaks, people do not experience it as a spreadsheet. They experience it as a grocery bill that went up $90, a mortgage payment they cannot refinance, a job that vanished when the factory got hit with a 30% electricity surcharge. That pain is real, it is immediate, and it demands an explanation. Central bank policy is not an explanation. Supply chain economics is not an explanation. Nobody has ever won an election by saying the price of your groceries is a function of natural gas feedstock costs in fertilizer production. But a face is an explanation. A neighborhood is an explanation. A religion is an explanation. So the question is not whether Western democracies will look for someone to blame in 2026. They already have. The question is why the blame is landing where it is landing, and what happens to roughly 50 million Muslims living in Europe and North America when it does. To understand that, you have to understand that this has all happened before, and recently enough that we have the receipts. After September 11th, reported hate crimes against Muslims in the United States jumped from an average of 25 per year in the 1990s to 481 in a single year. After the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, the numbers moved again. After the 2015 refugee crisis in Europe, mosque attacks rose across the continent. But notice something about all of those. They were security shocks. An attack happened and a backlash followed. It is an ugly pattern, but it is a legible one, and it burns out. The spike after 2001 came down. The spike after Boston came down. What is happening in 2026 is different and worse because it is not one shock. It is two arriving together, and they feed each other. A war that made everything expensive and an economy that needs somebody to hold responsible for the expense. One supplies the enemy, the other supplies the motive. That combination does not burn out. It compounds. Let's start with the war, because the war is the accelerant. The Muslim Public Affairs Council put it plainly in a policy paper this spring. Historically, periods of heightened American military engagement in the Middle East have been accompanied by an uptick in anti-Muslim sentiment. Not because Muslims in Michigan or Manchester have anything to do with the Strait of Hormuz, but because media framing and political rhetoric shift when a country goes to war, and they shift in a specific direction. To mobilize public support for a conflict, you have to make the enemy legible. You have to give people a shape to hate. And the shape that gets reached for over and over is not a government or a regime or a specific armed force. It is a faith. The Center for the Study of Organized Hate tracked posts that explicitly dehumanized and incited violence against Muslims from the 1st of January through early March. They found a sharp spike in anti-Muslim content on X in the hours immediately after the war on Iran began. Hours, not weeks. Not after any Muslim in the West had done anything at all. By the time the fighting settled into a ceasefire, the Pentagon comptroller was telling a Senate committee the operational cost had reached $29 billion. And that figure did not include repairing the bases in Kuwait and Bahrain that Iranian drones and missiles had hit. More than a dozen military facilities damaged across the region. Aircraft, radars, buildings. Now, From a purely military standpoint, you can argue about whether that counts as a success or a failure. The administration called it Operation Epic Fury and pointed to the ceasefire. Critics pointed to a blockaded waterway, a global energy crisis, and a memorandum of understanding that reportedly includes $300 billion toward Iranian reconstruction, which is a strange line item to find in a victory. But here is what matters for our story. It does not actually matter who won. What matters is that the war was expensive, that ordinary people are paying for it at the checkout counter, and that when a war goes badly or ambiguously, the political system needs somewhere to put the anger, and it never puts the anger on itself. Now the second shock, the one that turns background prejudice into a political program. The numbers here are not speculation, they are already on the books. Brent crude jumped 44% from where it sat before the war, trading around $105 a barrel. Moody's Analytics estimated the war cost American consumers and taxpayers roughly $132 billion and said the meter was still running. American consumer price inflation hit 3.3% on an annual basis in March, the highest level in nearly 2 years, driven almost entirely by energy. Europe got hit harder, and it got hit at the worst possible moment. The Strait closed after a brutal 2025 to 2026 winter had already drained European gas storage down to roughly 30% of capacity. Qatari liquefied natural gas stopped flowing. The Dutch TTF benchmark, which is the price signal for the whole continent, nearly doubled to over 60 euros per megawatt hour by mid-March. On the 19th of March, the European Central Bank postponed its planned rate cuts, raised its inflation forecast, and cut its growth projections. The warning attached to that decision was blunt. A prolonged conflict would likely produce stagflation, and the big energy-dependent economies, Germany and Italy, could fall into technical recession before the year is out. Chemical and steel manufacturers started adding surcharges of up to 30% just to cover their electricity bills. Shell warned Europe could face actual fuel shortages as early as April. Britain, according to the International Monetary Fund, will take the biggest hit of any major economy because Britain is unusually exposed to natural gas prices. UK inflation is expected to breach 5%. The country's own Food and Drink Federation said food price inflation could triple by the end of the year. Triple. And this was not contained to the West. Fuel rationing began in Sri Lanka. The Philippines declared a state of emergency. Nigeria, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Vietnam all hit fuel shortages. Fertilizer production, which runs on natural gas, seized up, which means the next planting season is compromised, which means food prices have not finished climbing yet. The United Nations warned the disruption was already feeding global hunger. That global backdrop matters because it means the pressure is not going to release. There is no quiet quarter coming where everybody calms down. Sit with what that means at street level. It means a working family in Birmingham or Bradford or Rotterdam or Duisburg opens a heating bill they cannot pay, walks into a supermarket where the basics cost half again what they did last year, and asks the only question anyone asks in that moment: who did this to me? And there is an entire political industry, extremely well-funded and extremely online, waiting with an answer. This is where the two shocks fuse, and this is why 2026 is different from 2015 or 2016 or 2001. Because this time, the people offering the answer are not on the fringe. They are in government. 7 European Union member states currently have far-right parties inside their governing coalitions. Croatia, the Czech Republic, Finland, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, Slovakia. That is not a protest movement. That is a bloc. In France, the National Rally has polled above 30%, campaigning against what it calls open doors. France issued 42% fewer residence permits in the first 9 months of 2025 than the year before. And that was before the energy crisis. In Germany, the Domestic Security Agency spent 2025 arguing in court that the AfD is extremist. In February 2026, an administrative court in Cologne ruled the classification was not justified, and the agency quietly stopped using the label in public while it appeals. Whatever you think of that ruling, the practical effect is that Germany's largest opposition party just got handed a certificate of respectability at the exact moment German industry is sliding toward recession. In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders has now served in parliament since 1998, making him the longest sitting member of the body he once dismissed as fake. His party built its entire program on the argument that Islam is incompatible with Dutch liberal values. In Britain, Reform has led YouGov polling at around 24%. Religious hate crimes against Muslims in England and Wales rose 19%, climbing after the Southport murders, in which the perpetrator was falsely reported to be Muslim, and after the riots that followed. Mosques were attacked, hotels housing asylum seekers were attacked, immigration law firms were attacked. Shabna Begum, who runs the Runnymede Trust, made the point that gets lost in coverage of the far right. It was not just the far right. Mainstream political and media actors did the work of normalizing narratives that scapegoated migrants, asylum seekers, Muslims, and people of color generally. The extremists supplied the vocabulary. The center supplied the microphone. And here is where it stops being about rhetoric and starts being about law. In June of 2025, 9 European Union member states signed an open letter calling for a reinterpretation of the European Convention on Human Rights. Read that sentence again. 9 democracies formally asking to loosen the human rights framework that Europe built out of the ashes of the last time the continent decided a minority was the problem. Sweden tightened residency and citizenship rules and doubled its minimum salary requirement for migrants. France passed a law simplifying the expulsion of foreign nationals. Germany started turning asylum seekers away at the border in what legal scholars have argued may breach its own obligations. Italy signed a deal with Albania to process asylum claims offshore. The Netherlands kept pushing hardline asylum reform through even after its governing coalition collapsed. None of that requires a far-right party to win an election. It only requires mainstream parties to be frightened of one, and the elections are coming. Analysts describe the next stretch as the best opportunity Europe's nationalist right has ever had, with national votes lining up in France, Italy, Spain, and Poland. Le Pen herself is currently barred from running after an embezzlement conviction, but her party does not need her. In Spain, the center-right may have to bring Vox into a governing coalition for the first time. In Poland, the nationalist Karol Nawrocki won the presidency and takes office in August. In Britain, Keir Starmer has openly complained that events thousands of miles away in Iran are wrecking his political fortunes, while his party braces for losses and the anti-establishment parties gain. Every one of those campaigns will be fought in the middle of a cost-of-living crisis. And every one of them has a ready-made villain. And in America, the same machinery is running faster. For most of the last 25 years, anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States lived in the culture. Suspicion at airports, slurs on the subway, bad polling numbers, ugly but ambient. In 2025 and 2026, it started becoming legislation. The Council on American Islamic Relations released its annual civil rights report this March under the title, The Right to Be Different. It ran 122 pages. It documented 8,683 discrimination complaints involving Muslims in the United States during 2025. That is the highest number the organization has recorded since it began tracking in 1996. Break that number apart, and you can see exactly where the damage lands. Employment discrimination topped the list with 1,101 complaints. Immigration and asylum complaints came next at 568. Direct hate incidents accounted for 555. Employment first, not violence, not vandalism, jobs. That tells you this is no longer only about fear. It is about exclusion from the economy at precisely the moment the economy is contracting. Alongside that, 5 separate federal legislative proposals were introduced seeking either to restrict Islamic religious practice or limit Muslim entry into the country. One of them, House Bill 5512, carries the title the No Sharia Act. Texas Governor Greg Abbott launched a campaign advocating a Sharia ban. 2 Texas Republicans in Congress, Keith Self and Chip Roy, founded a congressional group called American Without Sharia. By February, it had 45 members. 45. To give you a sense of scale, that would make it larger than the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, larger than the Freedom Caucus, roughly the size of the Congressional Black Caucus, a caucus in the United States Congress organized around a religion, and some of its members have publicly called for denaturalizing and deporting Muslim Americans. Then came the Muslim Public Affairs Council's own tracking, and this is the number that should stop you. Islamophobic incidents against Muslim Americans and their institutions rose 11-fold in the first 3 months of 2026. 11-fold. A 15-month high, and the year was barely a quarter old. Congressman Randy Fine of Florida has led the loudest charge, publicly calling for the deportation of New York City's Muslim mayor Zohran Mamdani, and making comments so openly dehumanizing that even reporting them feels like giving them oxygen. Carr's report also documented something it called collective punishment. Afghans, Somalis, and Syrians were identified as the most heavily targeted communities, hit through sanctions and exclusionary policies aimed at entire nationalities rather than individuals. And it does not stop at Muslims. It never does. The Muslim Public Affairs Council noted the impact on what it called adjacent communities: Sikhs, Hindus, Armenians, Arab Christians, anyone who looks close enough to the picture in someone's head. In 2001, 4 days after the towers fell, a Sikh gas station owner named Balbir Singh Sodhi was murdered in Arizona by a man who thought he was killing a Muslim. That is what happens when a society decides to hate a silhouette. Statistics are a way of not feeling things. So let's go somewhere specific. Basildon is a town in Essex, about 30 miles east of London. According to the 2021 census, it is 93% white. Muslims make up less than 2% of the population. A single mother there, working full-time, raising 2 children, has spent the last stretch of her life documenting racist incidents, supporting victims, and organizing meetings with the local council. She was racially abused walking through her favorite park. She stopped going. She has said she no longer feels safe in the place she calls home. Campaigners have warned that in areas where minority communities are small and isolated, the risk is higher, not lower. Visibility becomes vulnerability. When there are only a handful of you, you are not a community. You are a target that everyone can find. The women in that town describe changing their daily routines, watching over their shoulders. The Runnymede Trust has documented what that constant hypervigilance does to a body over time. It is not just fear. It is measurable, long-term physiological damage, the kind that shortens lives quietly. That is the part the polling never captures. The cost is not only the attack, it is the anticipation of the attack, carried every day by people who have done nothing. And it is not only towns like Basildon. Universities have turned into flashpoints, with Muslim students reporting intimidation and open disruption of their prayers on campus. Across parts of Europe, public desecrations of the Quran have become a recurring provocation, staged for cameras and defended as free expression while mosques quietly upgrade their security. In Australia and Britain, vandalism against Islamic institutions has climbed in step with every news cycle that links a faith to a headline. And the amplifier keeps running. The digital sphere has become a machine for coordinated harassment campaigns targeting Muslim leaders, activists, and public figures. In 2023, New York State tracked a 417% increase in online hate speech against Muslim communities in a single month after conflict broke out abroad. That was 2023, with a smaller war and a healthier economy. Now run that same machine with the same incentives in a year when a war has raised the price of bread and a fifth of the electorate is looking for somewhere to put the blame. Now, if this documentary just kept stacking bad news for another 10 minutes, you would be right to distrust it. Doom is easy to sell, and it is usually lazy. So let's take the strongest case against everything I have just told you. Seriously. First, Muslims are not the only group under pressure, and by raw numbers, they are not the most attacked. In FBI data for 2024, out of 11,679 reported hate crimes, 228 were anti-Muslim. Anti-Jewish hate crimes numbered more than 2,000, more than double all other religiously motivated crimes combined. Anti-Black hate crimes remained the single largest category. If you tell a Muslim audience they are uniquely persecuted, you are lying to them, and the lie will curdle. Second, violence against Muslims in the United States remains statistically rare. Discrimination is widespread. Murder is not. Those are different problems, and conflating them helps nobody. Third, not every trend line points down. Zohran Mamdani is the mayor of New York City. A Muslim man runs the largest city in the United States, elected by its residents in the same year that a congressional caucus is agitating to deport him. Both of those things are true. That is not a country that has made up its mind. That is a country in an argument. Fourth, in September 2025, a federal judge ruled against government officials in a case brought by academic associations, finding they had deliberately coordinated across agencies to target a civil society organization. Courts have pushed back. They have not always lost. Fifth, and this one matters most, there is serious research suggesting that the standard economic story is incomplete. A study published this year found that hostility toward immigration and support for national populist parties is driven substantially by anomie, loneliness, low social trust, disconnection, factors that show up across income levels, not just among the economically vulnerable, which means fixing the economy might not fix this, which is worse news than the theory I have been selling you, not better. And sixth, the data does not support the security argument at all. The Global Peace Index and Global Terrorism Index both indicate that the fear of extremism plays a limited role in shaping actual risk, even though it exerts enormous influence over political narratives. As the Muslim Public Affairs Council argued, the assumption that curtailing the rights of American Muslims makes anyone safer is not supported by evidence. It does the opposite. It corrodes the trust and cooperation that real security actually depends on. So no, 2026 is not fated. Nothing here is a prophecy. But every single one of those counterweights depends on institutions holding: courts, coalitions, local councils, newsrooms. And institutions are exactly what a cost of living crisis erodes fastest. So what breaks the cycle? Not silence. Silence has been tried extensively for 25 years, and it produced record complaint numbers and a 45-member congressional caucus. Documentation changes it. The reason we can even have this conversation with real figures instead of vibes is that people spent decades building the trackers. CAR since 1996, the hate crime monitors, the academic researchers who count things nobody else wants counted. Every incident that gets logged is a fact that a politician has to argue with later. Coalition changes it. Every serious study of this pattern says the same thing. The hatred never stays in its lane. It runs from Muslims to Sikhs to Hindus to Arab Christians to anyone with the wrong surname, which means the constituency with a stake in stopping it is enormous and mostly does not know it yet. Local politics changes it. Not the presidential race, the council seat, the school board, the police oversight panel. The far right did not begin in national parliaments. The French National Rally spent the 1970s and 80s quietly building municipal and regional networks while everyone laughed at them. That is the whole playbook, and it is available to anybody willing to be that boring for that long. And honesty changes it. Not grievance, honesty. The moment this becomes a story about how the world hates you, it stops being a story anyone outside can join. The strongest version of this argument is not that Muslims are victims. It is that a society which needs a scapegoat to survive its own economic failures is a society that has already stopped functioning, and that everybody living in it is going to find that out eventually. The war ended with a ceasefire and a reconstruction bill. The energy prices will drift down slowly over a couple of years, but the caucus is still there. The bills are still filed. The polling is still climbing. The machinery built during a crisis does not get dismantled when the crisis passes. It just goes looking for a new reason to exist. That is why 2026 is the hinge. Not because it is the worst year that has ever happened, because it is the year the temporary becomes permanent unless enough people notice in time. So now you know how it fits together. A blocked waterway becomes an energy shock. An energy shock becomes an inflation crisis. An inflation crisis becomes a search for someone to blame. And a search for someone to blame becomes law. That sequence is not new. It is not even hidden. It has run in this exact order in one country after another for a very long time. The only variable is how many people recognize it while it is still running. If you want the next one, we are breaking down how far-right parties actually take power step by step and why nobody sees it coming until it already has. That video is on screen now. Click it, and I will see you there.